It is the act of following or chasing after someone or something, right? So when I hear the word pursuit, I think of intentionally seeking out and following something with a motive, right? So for me, when I was in college, right, my wife is an overachiever. She graduated before I did. I'm older than her. We'll just leave it at that. She's smarter than I am in every single way possible. So, but I was in my senior year at ETBU, actually junior year, and my wife had already graduated, and she came back to visit campus, right? And I remember I was standing by a buddy of mine. His name was Tyler also. And I remember looking at him, and I was like, dude, that's Emily Yule. She's hot. I'm going to go talk to her. And he looks at me like I have three heads, and he's like, all right, whatever. So I go across chapel and say, hey, what's going on? Now, background, the only interaction really that we ever had was we shared a class together my first semester at ETBU. And and we had a few of the mutual friends. But outside of that, there really wasn't much. But I will say this, and she might get mad at me, but my first ever encounter with my wife was we were in basically a kinesiology class together, and the class was going around as a small class, and we said our names, and basically one fact about us. And Emily goes, well, my name is Emily Yule, and I haven't shaved my legs in 3 months. Right? I was like, all right, what a first impression, right? So from that being my first impression, me being around my wife, I was like, all right, well, she's still really pretty. So, and at this point, this was like 2.5 years after that, and surely she had shaved her legs at this point, right? So it's not a deal breaker anymore. So I went up to her and I was like, hey, how's it going? And I was slick, right? I was like, so I'm a youth pastor, and the church is buying me some new office furniture. You want to ride with me to Walmart and pick out office furniture? I've never really hung out. She's like, yeah, super excited to my face. I know that she had her doubts, right? So what I did, because I'm super smart, I got a mutual friend of ours, and I was like, hey, Jared, look, I really want to impress this girl. I like her a lot. We're both friends with you. Why don't you come with us so it's not awkward? So my friend came with us, and it basically turned into me and my wife explaining or describing each other, like what we were looking for in a dating relationship. And he was just third wheeling in the back seat in a Mustang. So it was awesome. All that to say, man, guys, when I started to pursue my wife, she didn't know it at the time, but she didn't have a chance. Like, she's going to be stuck with me, right? Because I asked her to be my girlfriend. It gets better than that. But when I asked her, for us to be legit, it was in a McDonald's drive-thru. We had gone to the movies, and we were going to go to a park and hang out and talk. And we're sitting in my car, and I'm like, hey, you want to go get some hot chocolate from McDonald's, and then we can, go sit at this park and talk and get to know each other even better. And while we were sitting in, basically the conversation while we were sitting in the McDonald's drive-thru was, hey, so you want to officially be my girlfriend? She didn't say no, and now we're married and about to have a kid. So here we are. But so when you think of pursuit, I think of all the time pursuing people in relationships, friendships, dating relationships, right? The girl that you're like me in your head right now that's super hot, whether she's in the room or not in the room, right? It's like, oh, dang, I'm going to go check that girl out, right? So to pursue is to just completely follow or chase after someone, right? And that's our theme. But here's the thing. A pursuit of Christ, or to pursue Christ, has to begin with one thing, and that's surrender, right? And we find that in Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 25, and it says this. So y'all bear with me. Matthew 16, 24 through 25 reads just like this. It says, and Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Now here's the thing, is I'm going to stop here and we're going to pick these two pieces apart. But before we go any further, I want you to do something. And I like to do this with my kids a lot too. So I want you to try really hard to put yourself in the mind and in the place of where the disciples were, right? They were first century Jews. It was a different time. Okay, they didn't have Whataburger or McDonald's to ask anybody to be their girlfriend in, right? So the disciples, I want you to think of what it would actually mean to them to hear these words that Jesus said. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. I mean, think about the weight that carried. Because what Jesus was telling them literally was to pick up, like, deny yourself, put away with yourself, and pick up your death device, right? Crosses, they weren't bedazzled or bejeweled, whatever you call it, designs that you put on the back pocket of jeans. They weren't designs in a tattoo shop. They weren't cool things to put on a necklace. They were literally devices that people used to murder and to torture criminals. Murderers, right? People who had affairs, who were unfaithful, right? The worst of the worst were crucified. And a lot of times, the crosses were put up on the outside of cities, okay? And they were put up on the outside of these cities to send a message, right? And the cross was completely humiliating. Most of the time, people were hung completely naked until death. It was intense. This isn't something that's small. When he says to pick up your cross, like, I can't help but think that may be some of the same things that I just told you that was running through the disciples' head. Like, you want me to pick up my cross, right? My form of torture, my form of death, and follow you. Like, that doesn't make sense. But we're going to clear it up, right? So, guys, here directly, look, Jesus uses this word deny. And in this context, and in the Greek context, this literal meaning is that they deny either another person or themselves. And in this context, it's themselves. So here's the thing. We're going to look at three things that every person must do, or must be willing to do, if you wish to follow Christ. Number one is this, is you have to be able to deny yourself, right? Now, denying yourself of luxuries is just a very, very small part of this, right? Y'all been to camp and stuff before, or maybe been to Christian concerts, or even had people, missionaries, maybe come to your church, right? And people come in, and if they're about foreign missions, or if they're representing an orphanage in Africa or something like that, and they're asking for people to fund to help feed the children, to feed the hungry. A lot of times, what you'll hear them say is something along the lines of, "Well, if you'll just go without Starbucks once a week, that you would be able to feed one of these children for a month," right? Or while you're at camp, a lot of times at our camp, what they tell the students when it comes to offering, look, if you don't buy a soda one day or 2 days during the week at camp and put that money in the offering plate, that's to go towards missions. So examples like that, denying yourself of luxuries, right? That's a very, very small part. What Jesus actually means here, and what he's actually saying to deny yourself, is this, is that in every moment of life, in every single moment of life, to say no to yourself and yes to God. In sin, in your goals, in your future plans, in your relationships, in your motives, and what you do with your downtime, say no to self and yes to Christ. So what we do, right, is what we have to be able to do is basically to dethrone ourselves and enthrone God, right? Put God in a position where he is the dominant ruler of our lives, right? So we have to completely do away with ourselves. Guys, I can be a really, really selfish person. And I do selfish things all the time, right? But God humbles me a lot because he gave me a wife that's patient and that is selfless, and reminds me, not by throwing it in my face, but a lot of times just reminds me of my selfishness, by how she'll serve me, and she'll do things to help me because she's a full-time teacher. Guys, she commits to helping me with ministry and church. She's here this weekend traveling when she could be using that time to get ahead in her lesson planning. Guys, she serves selflessly, and because of that, she's going to be a great mom. But the thing is this, is to put God in a position over our lives. We can't just look at it as a dominant or ruling principle But we have to let God rule over our lives because of our passion for Him and who He is and what He's done in our lives. And so we deny ourselves, number one, and we're talking about this. Look, our society is completely twisted and changed a lot of things. And there's two different kinds of surrender. One, there's total surrender, and two, tonight, what I'm going to call conditional surrender, right? What conditional surrender looks like is, for me, when I was 19 years old, God had placed a calling on my life in ministry, right? And actually it started when I was in high school, but I ran from it. I didn't want to do ministry. I wanted to be a high school football coach. I wanted to play a little junior college football. I wasn't that good. Okay, Mitchell's been at the school student teaching that I actually went to. I was just a big kid, and I loved to play football. I wasn't really scared to hit anybody, but I was slow. I was really, really slow. But the big thing here is, look, total surrender and conditional surrender. When I finally surrendered my life to Christ in ministry, I told God, all right, fine, I'll surrender to ministry. I'll be a youth pastor. I'll do whatever you want me to do, just not in East Texas. Get me out of East Texas. I'm originally a Dallas-Fort Worth guy. I'm from a town called Red Oak, which is just an extension of Dallas. And I was like, get me out of East Texas. And so my conditional surrender was, God, I'll do this if you'll do something else for me. So long story short, I'm on my second church as being a youth pastor in East Texas. And that's how God works. There's not conditions in the calling He puts on our lives, and He expects us to submit to it. Point blank, period. Right? So total surrender looks like this. Are you familiar with the story of Abraham, or Abram? In Genesis chapter 12, before Abram's name was changed to Abraham, God put a calling on his life where He says, look, dude, pack up your family and just leave your homeland to a place where I'm going to show you. So pack everything up, everything that you've known your entire life, your family, your servants, everything that you own, and just go in this direction, and I'll give you more instructions later. And without hesitation, Abram packed everything up and just started to move. In total surrender of what God was going to do for him. He's God, guys, that's a bold prayer. When we get to the point of surrender, if you know the song Oceans, where it says, Father, lead me where my trust is without borders, and let me walk upon the waters wherever you may call me. Guys, that's a bold, bold statement and a bold prayer to make. And that's exactly where Abram was at. He already had the heart. Like, God, you say the word and I'll move. Make me uncomfortable. God makes us uncomfortable all the time, right? So, completely surrender, right? So after we deny ourselves, the second thing that we have to be willing to do is this, is to take up our cross. Which basically means this, it's to take up a burden of sacrifice, right? So what I mean by that is this, is it is essential for us to serve others sacrificially. That's with our time, it's with our money, it's with other resources. Guys, there's a lot of times I sacrifice a lot of time where I could spend at home to go to football games, basketball games, I'm at lunch at Frankston High School 3 days a week, 2 days a week normally, just walking the halls, hanging out with kids. Time that I could be spending for myself, but to sacrifice and serve other people, right? And it's not a boastful thing, it's not to lift myself up, but guys, it's just an example that when God calls us to ministry, whatever calling is placed on your life isn't insignificant. We just talked about this past Wednesday. If God calls you to be a truck driver or a janitor, then be the best one you can be for the kingdom of Christ, right? You don't have to be a youth pastor, a pastor, or a missionary full-time to impact the kingdom and to serve other people. But for us to deny ourselves and to take up our cross means that we give sacrificially, right? God doesn't always call to a worldly promotion. Sometimes to serve others, to move and serve other people, guys, God doesn't always call us to bigger titles and bigger paychecks and more money and a bigger house. That's not how it works. Sometimes God asks us to step out in faith and to serve Him in whatever conditions we can. And our heart should be that we would rather be a door servant for the king than sit as a king of ourselves at a table of emptiness. Guys, it's not about us. It's not about our titles. It's not about our dreams and aspirations when it comes to worldly things. It's about serving where God puts us. And God has you exactly where you're supposed to be for a reason. Right? Whether you're born and raised in the town of Carlisle or you moved there, what God has placed you there for a reason. And that's to know Christ and to make Christ known. And to live with that sort of intensity. And so, guys, here's the thing. As someone who takes up their cross of sacrifice, the reality is like I said, they may be led to serve somewhere where the resources are not abundant, where there's not much of a title, there's not much of respect, right? It may be non-existent. But the reality is that if we truly love God, we'll follow Him wherever He calls us, to take up our cross and sacrifice ourselves. So a guy by the name of William Barclay, right? This guy, he's old, dead, deceased, way smarter than I am. He says this, and this is a direct quote. He says, to put it quite simply, the comfort of the fireside, the pleasure of a visit to a place of entertainment may well have to be sacrificed for the duties of eldership, the calls of youth club, the visit to the home of some sad or lonely soul. He may well have to sacrifice certain things he could well afford to possess in order to give more away. The Christian life is a sacrificial life. So guys, when we get to a place where we've denied ourselves and we pick up our cross and we serve people sacrificially, it brings us to a place where Galatians 2:20, Paul says to the church in Galatia, he says this, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. In other words, guys, we don't live for ourselves anymore. Right? Our desires become different. When we enter into Christ, we become a new creation. Right? Our desires change because God redeems us and He changes our focus. Guys, I didn't want to be a youth pastor. I didn't. My uncle's been a pastor for over 50 years. My dad did interim youth work. I didn't want that. I didn't want the headache and the pressure and the drama that comes with so many Americanized churches today. But the reality is God placed a divine calling on my life to serve people. And in whatever capacity that looks like, I have to be obedient. Because if I'm not, I'm missing my purpose, my divine calling, right? So we've been crucified with Christ. We've given up ourselves. We've picked up our cross. Right? So the third thing that we have to do, that we have to be willing to do, is to simply follow Jesus. Deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and third is to simply follow Jesus. Guys, follow the footsteps of exactly where Christ went. No matter where. Guys, Jesus went to the broken, to the poor, to the abused, the neglected, the rich, the church, the non-church. It doesn't matter. Where Jesus walked, we have to walk also. And we have to walk humbly and faithfully, right? You guys remember the game when you were playing with as a kid, Follow the Leader? Or even Simon Says, right? You do exactly what the leader or what Simon told you to do, right? It's the same thing with Jesus. So to be totally surrendered, to give all things up to Christ, is to put ourselves aside. And ultimately, when we get to that point, we live by Romans 12, verse 1. And it says this, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. When you boil it down, surrender is all about selflessness. It's all about putting other people before ourselves, putting God before ourselves. And when we do that, when we begin to look at other people, no matter their gender, no matter their sexual preference, no matter their race, no matter their social class or how much money they come from, no matter whether they brush their teeth or not, right? When we begin to look at people through the eyes of Christ and we begin to put those people first, we will serve and meet the needs of people at any cost. And the danger is in the Americanized church, especially in the Bible Belt, we've been taught that if you say a prayer, if you go to church, it's your salvation is signed, sealed, and delivered. But the reality is that Jesus says himself, it's not those who just cry out, Abba, Father, but those who do the will of my Father. To do Christ's will is to submit to Christ. Does that make sense? And when we submit, guys, that's when God moves. That's when God busts the doors open to the church, and you look at the book of Acts, and that the church is multiplying, and he was adding to their numbers daily because they were selling everything that they had and they were giving to the people who were in need. That's when the church is doing what the church was designed to do. That's when we get it. That's when surrender becomes real and it transitions into actually following Christ. And what we're going to talk about tomorrow is to pursue people. But the bottom line and what I want to challenge you with tonight is I want you to examine your own heart and your own relationship with Christ. And you have to answer that question. No one can answer it for you. Have you fully surrendered to Jesus? Because a life of conditional surrender isn't surrender at all. A life of halfway surrender isn't surrender at all. And Jesus paid way too high of a price where he came, he lived a perfect life, he gave up himself. Jesus had a choice and chose to give himself up on the cross to cover and pay for our sins so that we can spend eternity in our mess, in our emptiness, in our brokenness. No matter how far you are from God at this point in your life, guys, you are one step from turning around and pursuing Christ all over again. You could be 100 miles from Jesus, and he'll go 99 to meet you where you are and to bring you back. And that's my prayer, guys. If that's where you're at tonight, that is my sole hope and focus here, is that you come to know Jesus. And that you know really what it means to surrender so that you can start your pursuit of Christ. You can't pursue Christ while you live for yourself. Period. And we've made it too easy. So guys, in closing, this is what I want to do. We're going to close with one song of worship, but I really want to allow you time to check yourself. And tonight in your small groups, be open and honest and answer the hard questions. Ask hard questions. Be honest with yourself. And if you tonight are at a place and you say, look, I haven't really surrendered, be honest in that. There's no condemnation for people who are in Christ. Right? So I've been at that place. I've been at the place of halfway surrender, of conditional surrender, where it's like, okay, God, you can have certain parts of my life, but when it comes to my private life, when it comes to my dating relationship, when it comes to my calling of ministry even later, let me have control. I got this. I do that still today sometimes. Things go on financially or in our house or even in ministry. It's like, okay, God, I got this. I can handle it on my own. And when I don't surrender and turn things over to God, I make a bigger mess. So tonight, guys, that's our focus. Is are we surrendered or are we not? And then tomorrow morning and tomorrow night, we're going to talk about what it really actually looks like to pursue Christ. So let's pray, and then we're going to close in worship.